change of plan. We're not going to Tokyo. It's like, what? We're going to Osaka.
So you drag him with you?
So I dragged him with me, yeah. The rules and the customs, social norms around the rest of Japan don't really apply to Osaka. All of us have, at one point in our life, seen some magic. Only a very small subset of strange people who decide, I want to do it.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today I'm sitting here with Ben. Thank you for coming.
Nice to meet you.
Ben, you're a magician here in Osaka, in Japan.
I am, yeah.
And you do a lot, not only magic, you also operate an escape room. And we want to talk a little bit about all of these things. But first, maybe can you give us a bit more information about who are you, where you're from, and what brought you to Japan?
Where I'm from, originally from London, England, but I've lived more than half my life outside of England now, so I struggle. When people say, are you English? I struggle to say yes, just because I've been more than 20 years anywhere except for England.
It's an interesting question then, right? Like, where are you from? Do you mean like where you're from, where you born, or then, well, I've been in all these places. I come from those places and I'm here.
Yeah, I'd say the place that I identify as home is definitely Osaka. Because I got here 2011, so it's been 12, 13 years. Whereas I left London at 18 and haven't lived there been there for more than a few weeks at a time since then. It's always weird going back actually, because in some ways London is, home. Yeah. But every time I go back, something's changed. New buildings have come up.
That wasn't here when I was last in town. And,
more of the time, it's like that was a local bakery, or that was a supermarket, that was some local shop, and all of those have disappeared since being away. So yeah, London was home. It's still where my dad is, but it feels a bit alien to me now.
So what made you come to Osaka or to Japan in 2011?
Whole thing was a series of accidents. I think most people...
A series of accidents?
Yeah, I think most people who end up living in Osaka end up sort of doing it without realizing it by mistake. Long story short, I studied German at university.
Oh, interesting.
So I was in Germany for a year and studying the language at Leeds University, North England. My last year of university, met a girl. She was studying Chinese.
Okay.
We graduated from university, both got kicked out of home, didn't have a job, didn't have anywhere to live. So we thought, all right, we'll go to China for a couple of months, see if she can do anything with her Chinese. And 6 and a bit years later, finally left China.
So a kind of a spontaneous trip turned into a 6-year journey.
Yeah, well, they used to give out 3-month visas, but it wasn't like Japan where you have to be, gainfully employed. You could basically just go out, come back, and then they'd just sign you another 3 months. And you could do that pretty much indefinitely. So we thought, all right, 3 months, and then we'll go back to reality. And then after 3 months, we'll come back to China for 3 more months, and then we'll go back to England and grow up. And 3 more months came, like three more months, and then that's definitely it. And I was studying Chinese at this time and just fell in love with the language. Ended up actually doing a master's in linguistics in Chinese. So that kept me.
In which city were you in?
In Shanghai.
Oh, nice.
So kind of China light.
Yeah.
Not like the mean streets of some town in the middle of nowhere. It was sort of the most westernized part.
Most
of
Western,
China.
but when you get to, I lived in Shanghai for 1 year as well, and when you get there for the first time, for me it was 2012, I think. It's still quite a shock coming from the West. If you've never been, it is a westernized city. You have a big Western community, but it's still China.
Yeah. And particularly, I suppose, when I first got there, which would have been 2005 or 6, you'd be out on the street and you'd see people, and they'd get their cameras out. So before, a lot of people had camera phones.
Yeah.
So they'd get their cameras out, and then they'd be pretending to take a photo of some innocuous thing, and the camera would just be pointing in your direction.
Or sometimes even more like straight in your face.
Oh, sometimes they'd just brazenly do it. Yeah. So a lot of people. I mean, I when I'd go out to the outskirts, I'd meet kids who had never seen a foreign face before. I'd have kids crying because they're like, what's wrong with that guy's skin?
Yeah, why is he so white? Why are his eyes so different? Yeah.
So, yeah, that was a bit of a culture shock, but, a few years later, you kind of brush all of it off.
So 3 months turned into 6 years.
Yeah.
And then?
And then I finished my postgraduate. I was lucky to have a scholarship. So that kind of saw me through to the end of that. Once that finished, the scholarship stopped. I just ended a long-term relationship. So I didn't have my studies. I didn't have a long-term job, and I didn't have a relationship. So I was like, maybe something new. And a friend of mine was coming to Japan to study. He was going to go to Tokyo, and I thought, okay, maybe Japan sounds interesting. And I had a Japanese friend in Osaka, and I said to her, "I'm thinking of going to Tokyo." She said, "No,
don't go."
No, she said, "You're Osaka." I was like, "What's Osaka?" She was like, "Trust me, you're Osaka." I was like, "Okay." So without knowing what it was, based on just my friend's advice, I was like, "All right." And I called my friend who was going to study. I was like, "Change of plan. We're not going to Tokyo." He's like, "What? We're going to Osaka."
So you dragged him with you.
So I dragged him with me. Yeah. And I've got a twin brother and my brother as well. I was like, we're going to Japan. He was like, okay. So this was 2011. In fact, this was like early March 2011. So 3 weeks. It was like late February, sorry. So like about 3 weeks before the
earthquake.
The earthquake.
Tohoku earthquake, yeah.
Was when we'd booked all of our tickets. We'd sorted all of our...
accommodation, everything.
Accommodation, the university, and then suddenly, obviously, the news hits. And in China, at that point, it was the fake news was a thing back then as well. So no one knew what was going on, but it was like the reports were like, this is going to be
the end of the world,
complete nuclear meltdown. I remember there was talk of like something about like sodium helping to deal with radiation poisoning. So for a week or so, all of the corner shops, all of the supermarkets were completely sold out of salt because people had it in their heads that the salt with the sodium or the chlorine, I don't know what, something in the salt would somehow cure any potential radiation sickness.
It's like all the early remedies, quote unquote remedies to COVID when it started.
Yeah.
Right? Drink this, drink that, eat this, eat that, and
so it was a slightly strange time. When people say, "Where are you going?" Japan, and they're like, "What?" But I thought it's probably I'll go and see what happens. And Osaka, as you'll know, that was
relatively far away.
Yeah, that was the place where lots of foreigners who lived in Tokyo would escape to for like relative safety. So yeah, I got there a few weeks after the earthquake, and it was still a bit up in the air. But
how was it when you kind of like culturally speaking, you've been abroad outside of the UK for a while. You just spent 6 years in China, and you came from China to Japan. Were there things that really surprised you? Were you like expected to be maybe similar to your experience you had so far, but like very different?
Well, I'd been to Tokyo a few times before.
Okay, so you traveled before.
I traveled a bit to Japan. I think Shanghai being like the most westernized Chinese city, and Osaka, I'll say, being almost like the most Chinese Japanese city, if that makes sense. A bit sort of rough and ready. A lot of the rules and the customs and the sort of social norms around the rest of Japan don't really apply to Osaka.
Yeah, people are more direct and more open, more cheerful, more friendly.
Yeah. So I think the gap was a lot smaller. If I'd been from like some village out in like northern Xi'an or something, and then travel from there to like Tokyo or Kyoto. I think the cultural gap would have been a bit bigger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I settled in fairly quickly.
So when you arrived here, you said you kind of went to university as well?
I tried to study at a school. I'd studied a little bit while I was in China. I was doing evening classes.
Okay.
It was actually very good. So I was in a class with, obviously for Chinese speakers to learn Japanese. And it was nice because it cut a lot of the sort of time-wasty things out. Because we all spoke Chinese, we all read the kanji. We didn't have to waste any time on like learning what the kanji are.
You recognize the meanings a little bit.
So I could read, it was strange because I could kind of read the newspaper and get roughly what was going on. I remember before I moved to Japan, when I came to visit in Tokyo, I remember being in a shop and literally writing Chinese and showing it to the shop assistant because I knew that writing you'd largely get your point across. So that was a big advantage. And also, like pronunciation-wise, there's a surprising amount of Chinese and Japanese that is still maybe not exactly the same, but if it's this in Chinese, it's probably that in Japanese.
You have the onyomi and the kunyomi of the kanji, right? The different readings. And
exactly, yeah.
The one that comes from China usually phonetically sounds a bit similar.
Exactly, yeah.
So it seems like throughout all those years, you had a strong interest in linguistics. Studied German, went to China, studied Chinese, started learning Japanese, came to Japan, continued Japanese studies.
Yeah.
Throughout all that, where did it start with magic?
Towards the very end of my time in China, I was I met a guy who was studying kung fu with this like stereotypical, the sort of guy who you'd see in like an over the top movie about kung fu. He was this old Chinese master. He was like 700 years old, and I think it was like early 80s maybe. And he lived
long beard, and
he didn't have the beard, but he was an incredible old guy, and he had these students. He'd do like one-on-one lessons with people. And I met a French guy who was studying with this guy, and he said, it's really cool. Like this guy's straight out of like a comic book. You gotta try this out. So I went and started having a few lessons with him. And it was basically just stretching the whole time, but it was really interesting. And the French guy who'd introduced me to him was also a magician.
Oh,
and I was like, that's really cool. And I told my brother, said, I've always kind of wanted to learn. Could you connect me with this guy? He was called Johnny Hero. He was also straight out of a comic book, and he used to do like every type of magic.
So like card tricks,
cards, coins. He'd do stage magic. He'd do like big illusions. He did absolutely everything. Most of it, I didn't realize at the time, extremely badly. But
when you see it for the first time, it's wow.
To me, he was the coolest guy ever. He was. It's like, have you watched Arrested Development?
No.
So there's an American comedy show, and one of the characters called Job is like your stereotypical horrendous magician. And in retrospect, he was a lot like that. But I thought he was just brilliant. So yeah, my brother started learning some stuff with him, and learned a bit with coins and cigarettes, and then started doing cards. And I was like, well, maybe I'll try practicing a bit as well. And I just fell in love with it.
What was it that really got you hooked on magic, or card magic in particular?
I don't know. I think like all of us have at one point in our lives seen some magic. I think there's like only a very small subset of strange people who decide, I want to do it. And I was just one of them. It was just something about it, about creating these little impossibilities. But I just thought was brilliant. So started practicing, and I didn't know that there were a couple of magicians in China that I knew, but I didn't really know many. So most of it was studying through books, through videos, and then I start getting to meet the odd magician. I did a few shows. I think the barrier to entry then was very low. Being like a foreigner who spoke Chinese in China means you've got a lot more opportunities, right? The magic doesn't have to be that good.
Was it something popular though in China to see or do magic tricks?
It was relatively unknown. In fact, a lot of restaurants in China, the moment they see some cards, they're like, I'm afraid you're gonna have to put those away.
It's gambling.
Because they think it's gambling, yeah. So it wasn't that well known. Now it's a lot more popular. There are a few really big Chinese magicians who've popularized it. But yeah, it wasn't super well known, and there weren't that many resources in Chinese. So I definitely had an advantage being a foreigner. I probably did some horrendous corporate gigs that
corporate. So
it was my friend Johnny Hero. He had a lot of gigs, and some he couldn't do, so he'd throw them off to me.
Nice.
So I'd happily go and do.
So you kind of were doing this as an amateurish, but still already performing a little bit.
Yeah.
And you brought that passion here to Japan.
Yeah. So I came to Japan, and I was practicing magic on the side, not too seriously. My big focus was on the language.
What do you mean by the learning the Japanese language?
Yeah, so I went, to go back to that thread, I went to a language school, and it was horrendous. So the school I'd been to in China was very, very good. The evening school, they just knew what they were doing. They knew what we needed to know, what we didn't need to know.
Yeah.
The school here in Japan was every day we would spend the first hour looking at 5 kanji. It was me and a lot of Taiwanese classmates who already knew what the kanji were, and still just so rigid. No, you've got to learn these 5 kanji.
Just sit there for an hour.
Writing them. They say this one means this, and this one means this, and this one goes in this word, and stuff that we already know. And to the non-Chinese speakers, it's like well over their head. So there's just not really. It's certainly not something you should necessarily do in class.
So the approach of teaching wasn't necessarily suitable to every type of student.
Yeah, I remember one of the teachers, they were explaining some grammar form. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe ikeyoshi and nakeyoshi. I don't know. But I remember asking, but I notice in this instance we're saying this, but in this instance, why is it not the same? And the teacher goes, 日本語難しいですね. Japanese is difficult. And that was the answer. That was all I got. So I was like, okay, this is not really worth like 4 hours of my day. So I'd just go to a cafe near mine, and I had my old Japanese textbooks, and I'd just study through those every day and talk to locals, made friends, and that's how I ended up learning Japanese. So I didn't really learn very much from the few months I was at school, but I was spending 4 or 5 hours a day studying on my own. So I didn't have that much. I was doing a bit of magic, but not really that seriously.
Really. What was the moment where you kind of really decided to do more than just magic for fun and took it professionally?
So I got married here, and then 3 years later stopped being quite so married, and she was very much insistent that I was the typical sort of get a proper job. So I was working at university and spending a lot of time doing that, and I was just miserable with it. And once we'd split up, I was like, for the first time in years, I was like, all right, what do I want to do? And I thought, I kind of want to do magic again, like a bit more seriously. So I looked around, went on some forums, and people said, there's a magic bar that you might want to try. So I called them up and said, I want to work at your bar. And they said, sorry, we're not looking for anyone. I was like, okay, but I'm going to pop in anyway and see if you can give me an interview. So went down there, spent a week practicing like a little a mini show of like 15 minutes. Went down there, did it, and they said, all right, we won't be able to pay you, but you can start, you can do a couple of days a week at the bar.
Unpaid.
And that's how it started.
You had to have a lot of dedication to kind of drop your main job and decide to just...
Yeah, well, I was still doing a bit of work. I wasn't just working for free there. Yeah. I had a few things on the side. There was doing some translation, doing some consulting work, and then started. And the magic really took over. It was like earning nothing, but just absolutely loving it. And I felt like I was really sort of learning on the job.
What kind of shows were you doing at the time?
So it was a small magic. It was a magic bar. For listeners who don't know, in Japan, there's quite a unique culture of magic bars, which are somewhere between like a regular bar and a proper like close-up theater.
Oh, interesting. So
there are literally hundreds of them
all
around Japan.
Oh,
yeah.
I had no idea.
And they range from, some of them basically just bars with a little bit of magic. Maybe the barman will show you a few tricks. Others are like basically a close-up theater where they'll serve drinks as well.
So you have like a little stage and these kind of round tables with high chairs and people look, and then there will be a show a couple of nights.
Yeah, usually it will be like, so the bar I was working at had a big semicircular table that the magician was at, and then around it you'd have 10 seats, and that was like the performing space.
Oh, okay.
And then there was also the bar for drinking, so it was very much, this is where you drink and this is where you watch like proper magic.
When you started performing at that bar, did you feel there were like a kind of a different approach and different interaction with Japanese customers than as you had with customers in China when you performed there?
Yeah, in China it was a lot more. They weren't like formal shows. You'd usually be sitting with. There'd be a group who are having some sort of event or a party, and then you'd go up to them. Usually you're standing, and then you'd perform things to each other.
So like you really walk around and you perform basically for individual customers around the bar.
Or small groups, yeah. So there's a branch of magic called walk around magic, which is exactly that, where you'll walk up to a group, show them some stuff, and then head to the next group. So that's what I was used to. Whereas what I was then doing was more formal, sit down, a show of usually like 15, 20 minutes. So it was a bit more theatrical. When I started, I had this sort of like gambling persona that really wasn't great, especially since in Japan, most people don't play. A lot of people don't even know what the suits of the cards are. Yes. So they don't play a lot of the, poker. It's a bit more popular now, but a lot of people wouldn't know, the ending of a trick.
So that means for you, it's sometimes maybe difficult also when you want to interact with the audience and you want to ask them to do something with a specific card, but they don't know which card you're talking about or what the meaning of this card is.
Yeah, people would forget. If the cards don't mean much to you, it's easy to forget them. So yeah, that was definitely a thing at the start. And bit by bit, I learned my way around. I found the things that worked. I found a character that worked for me. And just became more and more at home with it, and just got better, basically.
When you're learning, so you still focus today mostly on card tricks?
Cards and coins, yeah.
Cards and coins. If someone is interested in learning this or curious about it, what would you say are like the skills that need to be practiced? I assume there will be like technical skills on handling cards and coins, but also, as you just mentioned, the challenge of you need to hook your audience, right? You need to engage with them and interact with them because they're the ones you're doing it for.
Well, it depends what kind of what you want to get out of magic. I mean, I know the majority of magicians, the people who are buying the magic books and who are learning magic, the majority of them never perform for the general public. They're very happy. Some people don't even perform for their friends and family.
Oh, okay.
They're very happy just learning the craft of magic. In the same way as you might have someone who plays a musical instrument, not so they can do a concert, but they just enjoy playing it, you know, in the privacy of their own home. So if that's what you want to do, fine. To me, it seems a bit of a shame. I think magic's something that should be shared.
If I take your example, I imagine someone buying a guitar and playing the guitar. If you do it for yourself, I can see the fun and enjoying yourself just playing your own music. But if you cannot perform a magic trick for yourself, right? Because
some magic you can.
Really?
You can. I mean,
but you know what is going on, and so you can't really bluff or surprise yourself, can you?
No, you don't have particularly tricks that require audience interaction. Obviously, it's a lot more difficult doing on your own. But there are some tricks that are just visual impossibilities.
Oh,
changing one card into another card, and practicing that to a level where it looks like real magic. Even if you never show anyone else, that for you might you know be satisfying enough.
Interesting.
I think for me, it's that interaction, it's that two-way communication of close-up magic that I really like. So I spend a lot of time practicing, but usually it's with the end goal of actually, you know, communicating something to someone. I don't think I'd have stayed in magic this long if it were just me practicing on my own.
So when came the time when you decided to stop what you were doing on the side and make magic a full-time project?
It's never actually been full-time.
Still today.
It's there were certainly a few years where it was almost all I was doing. But I'd still have odd jobs. I've never needed magic to pay for
pay the bills.
To pay the bills, yeah. Which I think is good because it means that I can do the magic I want to do, rather than doing the magic that is going to get me more work.
And so when you became professional and you took this the main part of your work and your life, you didn't continue doing this by yourself, right? You mentioned you had a twin brother who is also into magic, and you also started working with another magician who's quite famous in Japan for his coin tricks, right?
Ponta the Smith.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you three started something together at some point.
So Ponta, I met Ponta at the magic bar that I was at, and he and I happened to work the same 2 nights every week, and we'd do our shows, and then we'd head upstairs and we'd chat just hour after hour after hour, and became very close. Shared a lot of magic with each other. Most of it, especially when I started doing coins, most of it was him showing me. He's one of the world's best coin magicians.
Wow, in Osaka.
And he's in Osaka. He's just a genius. And so I started learning a lot from him, and we'd just talk about magic, about technique, about theory, about presentation, and a couple of years into it, we were looking for an opportunity to perform a bit more than like 15 minutes to potentially drunk audiences, and wanted something a little bit more theatrical.
So like a proper 1 hour show, like a
kind of so we had like a 70 minute show, 80 minute show, that we started at the basement of a bar in Osaka that my brother had turned into a comedy club. So my brother's a stand-up comedian. You might want to talk to him when he gets back to Osaka.
Would love to.
So it's the Raw Comedy Club. And then one day a week, it was our Impossible Theatre.
The Impossible Theatre.
Yeah, so it started with me and Ponta, and then another amazing Japanese magician called Takeshi, who's just amazing with cards. He joined us as well, and so we had this theatre. But we also, the three of us, also started a magic company called the Impossible Company, and that is essentially for magicians to learn more magic tricks.
Is there a big community of magicians in Japan that are interested in learning? And
so it was kind of two-way. it's kind of like a bridge between the Western magic community and the Eastern, the Japanese magic community. I think because of the language barrier, there are a lot of magicians in the West who never ever get to see some of the incredible magic in Japan, either because things never get translated or they get done so like badly that a lot of it's lost in translation.
That's a common issue, right? Yeah.
And then the other side of it, you'd have a lot of great magic that a lot of Japanese magicians didn't have access to because they couldn't understand it. So we create magic ourselves. I've released some things, Ponta, Takeshi, and then we'd find some other great Japanese magicians, film it at our little studio, dub or subtitle things, produce them properly. And then we'd also have friends from America, from England, from a lot of Spanish magician friends.
Oh, cool.
Spain is probably the most advanced sort of magic community in the world. Yeah.
Wow.
So I'd have a lot of those magicians would share stuff, and then we would make it accessible to the Japanese audience.
What kind of magic is popular in Japan? Magic with card tricks or with coin tricks? Or
coins. So Ponta must have been just over 10 years ago. Ponta released a DVD called Sick, which shared a lot of his brand new coin handlings, coin plots, coin tricks, and that was just a global phenomenon in the magic world. And thanks to that, a lot of young Japanese magicians started practicing with coins. So you'll find a lot more coin magic in Japan than you will in other places.
I don't know if it's possible, but if we look at magic is a category, and then I imagine there's different branches. What kind of branches are maybe commonly referred to in magic, and which one is
Okay, so the two big categories are close-up and stage.
Okay.
So stage would be the big illusions, sawing people in half, flying, all of the David Copperfield sort of stuff. But also like stage manipulation. So you'd have a magician on stage where you might have seen where cards just keep appearing out of midair. So that would all be stage magic. Then you have close-up magic, which is the stuff I do, which is literally usually sitting around a table. But then within close-up magic, you've got lots of different types. I think one of the great things about magic is there's sort of room for everyone. If you're super technical, there are loads of technical things that you can do where you don't really need to even communicate with the audience. There are people who, a lot of magicians you'll see on YouTube, are just technically incredible. It's not something that they could sustain over like an hour-long show, but for like some of them even specialize in like a few seconds of just impossibilities. Super technically difficult stuff. Other magicians are amazing at making gimmicks and just ingenious devices. There's a young Japanese, I think he was a high school student when he started, and he used to create these incredibly intricate card gimmicks where one card was doing almost nothing, that would just switch to another card and then another card. And it was just beautiful, like engineering on a small scale.
Oh, so this is actually a trick, not necessarily done with hands, but actually making an object that
just fabricating things. Yeah,
that's cool.
So he's called MH-kun, and he's
MH-kun,
a genius, and he's recognized among all magicians as being like one of the best at doing this in the world. And he taught himself this sort of thing. He's out in Hokkaido, and taught himself all of these ideas and techniques. So that there's room for that sort of magician. He's not a performer, but he's just a brilliant craftsman. There are magicians who maybe they don't create the techniques or the plots or the routines, but they're just brilliant at weaving stories and presentations. There are other magicians who are great at are just great natural performers.
So there's really something for everyone and different ways to bring it to an audience as well.
Yeah,
right?
there are even like mathematical principles behind a lot of, especially card tricks.
Okay.
And so there are magicians. There was one great American magician died a couple of years ago called Simon Aronson, who was a lawyer by day and a magician in his spare time. And he came up with so many of these just really strange mathematical principles that allowed you to just do seemingly impossible stuff. You know, the spectators would be cutting and shuffling and mixing and choosing numbers, and the result of it is, you know, they'd find their own card. And even as the magician performing these things, even though there's no sleight of hand involved, you're performing and you're fooling yourself. You're like, how is this working? So there really is room for just about anyone.
Is there a principle behind all of magic? A principle such as making something that's seemingly impossible, or something that defines it to be a magic trick? It has to like kind of be in line with a given principle.
It's one of the big questions in magic, like what is magic? And I think every magician has their own definition. To me, it's the illusion of the impossible.
The illusion of the impossible.
I think if you don't have an impossibility, it can't be magic. It can be magical in that sense that you know, it can give you warm, fuzzy feelings. You know, some people say, a beautiful sunset is magical. I mean, yes, but magic as an art form, I think, needs to have an element of the impossible. I would say, in my definition, a sunset is not. It might be magical, but it's not magic. And there's a lot of tricks that are classed as magic that I wouldn't necessarily put into that category.
Interesting.
So I think it has to have the illusion of impossibility. Outside of that, it's whatever you want to do with that. If it's a trick where you're counting things, if it's a very visual trick, if it's something that's very technical, if it's something that a 3-year-old can do, as long as it has the illusion of impossibility, for me, it still falls into magic.
Can you tell me a bit more about the Elusive Illusive?
Yes. So this is my book of... I've written a couple of books of magic, but this is the one about my magic. So I've written books from other magicians, but it started off would have been about 4 or 5 years ago. I had actually a German magician friend called Pitt Hartling coming to visit and do some lectures and shows around Japan. He's one of the best close-up magicians there is, and I'd been showing him a few of my ideas and routines, and one in particular he really liked, and he just got back to Germany. He said, can you send me the details of that? And I could have simply just written the bare bones, but I thought it might be fun to write it up as though it were the sort of thing that you'd see in a magic book with
images, explanations.
Yeah, well, I didn't have the photos at that point. And he's magically literate enough not to need that, but magic books usually start in the same way as like a recipe book. Magic books will usually have a certain format. So you'll have a routine, and it will start with the effect, like what the audience sees. And then you'll have the setup, if there's any. And then you'll have, sometimes it will like an overview of the method. So and then you'll have the full breakdown, and sometimes maybe the scripting as well.
And so you just, from this idea of sharing your magic with this other magician, you kind of wrote an entire book.
Yes, I started with this one trick. I was like, that was quite fun actually. And then I thought, okay, maybe I'll write a little bit more. And I thought, okay, maybe I've got enough of my ideas to make a full book out of this. And started writing. I'd written, it's like a lot of these projects where you start off absolutely flying, and that last 10% takes like more than 50% of the time. So within maybe 6 months, I had most of a book, the problem was that in Japan, the market for an English book was not very high.
Yeah, it's tricky.
And I mean, I could have written it in Japanese and then got it corrected, but it's a lot of work. And for our company, it would have been our first book, so it's quite a big investment of time, with potentially very little return. So Pontus said, maybe you can go to one of the big American magic publishers and see if they want to do anything with it, since I had this thing written. And there's a company called Vanishing Inc., run by an American and an English magician, and they're both friends of mine. So I wrote them an email saying, I've got this book, and they took a look through it, and they said, it was just a Google Doc of all of the ideas, and they really liked it. So they said,
awesome.
let's sign a contract, let's go forward. So then got the photos taken, finished. As I said, that last 10% is what takes so much time. Proofreading, changing little bits and pieces. And it finally came out 3 or 4 months ago. And the reception's been really, really good. So.
Congratulations. So you've revealed your tricks in a way, right? Some of them, at least. Because we always hear this famous phrase, a magician never reveals his tricks. But actually, in a way, you need to, right? To engage more people, to get more people interested in the craft of magic and kind of practicing. And because if it's never revealed, nobody can ever really learn. Yeah,
I think that's a big misconception, that magic's this really closed society. One of the big questions I get is, how do you learn magic? And fact is, most magicians are very, very open with each other. In fact, most magicians, there are like 2 ways of making a living out of magic, largely. One is performing to lay audiences. So that might be doing theatre shows, it might be doing corporate events. But then the other revenue stream for magicians is teaching magic to other magicians. In fact, there are a lot of, I would say too many magicians who make their entire magic experience and career is teaching magic to other magicians who there are prolific magicians. In fact, Simon Aronson, the genius of these numerical principles, he wasn't a performer. He wrote best-selling magic books. He was super well known in magic and was not a performer at all. There are a lot of magicians who are great thinkers, but their magic almost exclusively appeals to other magicians. So you have this almost a sort of a Ponzi scheme of. I mean, it's a lot of magicians. Again, they don't want to perform for the real world, so it's fine.
Is it the same in Japan?
Yes.
Interesting.
In fact, a lot of Pontus stuff, the coin stuff, you won't see much of that in his everyday magic shows. These very intricate, super difficult, super technical, sometimes quite risky, very angly tricks just don't work for the real world.
So it works for a camera. It doesn't really work if you do it in front of people, because someone sitting a bit from another angle might see what is actually happening.
That's part of it. It's just the physical, if you look from here, you can see the coin. But more than that, even if the thing were angle proof, a lot of this stuff, either it's just over too quickly, or there's just information overload. There's too much for the audience to keep track. Remember, when magicians are watching a trick, we're watching something that we've probably seen variations of hundreds of times before. So we're fluent in the language.
Yes.
And so when we see like a variation on it, it like piques our interest. Whereas for a lay audience who don't know the original, and then they see just these strange things happening, a lot of it they just won't understand.
Yeah, it's like a second degree or deeper level understanding required.
Yeah, it's like this sort of meta performance. An example, so there's a classic trick in coin magic called the coin matrix.
Okay.
Where you have 4 coins on the table.
Okay.
And then you'll usually have cards covering the coins. And so you have one coin here, one coin here, one coin here, one coin here. You put the card over here, the coin disappears from here, and you have 2 coins in this corner. Coin disappears here, you have 3 coins in this corner, and then the coin disappears, and you have 4 coins in this corner. Classic piece of magic. Anyone can follow this. But what a lot of magicians like to do is play around with this concept. So you start with 1 and then 2 and then 3, and you expect to have 4, and at the end, all of them are back where they started. So for a magician, that's great because it surprises us. For a regular audience, it's a lot of information to take in a couple of seconds. So a lot of those things that we magicians find interesting, just theatrically, even if it's not a case of angles or practicality or difficulty, they just don't work very well for the real world.
That's quite interesting. And what's interesting too for me is that you say it's very similar abroad and in Japan in the end, right? So we talked a lot about you learning languages and so on, but it feels like magic is something that works without language in a way. It
can do, yeah. Again, magic is such a broad art that there's room for everyone. Some magicians are almost entirely non-verbal. Mine has quite a lot of talking. It's a lot of storytelling and comedy woven into the...
Which you do in Japanese?
Most of the time, yeah. Woven into it. I have a few silent pieces, but most of it is a combination of storytelling and magic. So that's the style that I found has worked for me. I would say in Japan, more magicians excel at the technical side rather than I think the weak point of Japan is maybe the presentation, the scripting, the theatrical side of magic.
Interesting. So would you say this is like a cultural difference, that maybe they are less comfortable on stage or kind of even intimate setting to kind of take the risk of maybe making a mistake and revealing something? Or
yeah, I think it's maybe less revealing something in terms of the magic, more revealing a part of themselves. I think they're more comfortable with the focus on the elements, the focus on the coins or the cards rather than the focus being on them.
Interesting.
And the performance.
So in your magical journey, you've kind of started performing at a bar and then left that bar to start your own Impossible Theater, the Impossible Company, released the books, The Elusive Illusive. But you've also decided to work on kind of a different type of magic that doesn't involve cards sometimes, and where you basically lock people in a room.
Yeah, and, you make it sound a lot more sinister than than it really is.
So you've started a company that operates escape games?
Yeah, they started off as escape games. They're now much more like interactive movies. The escape room element has largely gone. That starts. So my twin brother Ed, he was in Holland on holiday. Must have been 6 years ago, and called me up and said, "Ben, I just did this thing called an escape room. It's really fun. We should make one." I was like, "Okay." So I Googled what's an escape room and looked at a few of the websites that came up. I was like, "Wow, this sounds amazing. This is like you're in this sort of real life puzzle,
like a thriller, basically."
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And then kind of had an idea of what ours might look like, just based on the descriptions. And then we went back to England for Christmas, and we played one. We played the most popular one in England, and we did it, and we were like, just so disappointed. We were like, "What? That's the best one in English. Surely we can do better than that." And I think I built this idea up in my head of what an escape room was, and the reality was just so far removed from that.
So for people that are listening and are maybe not familiar with it, an escape room basically is one room or a couple of rooms connected together that you enter. The door is locked, and you have about an hour to escape the room. And to do so, you need to solve a series of puzzles and little games to find clues and to kind of ultimately find a key that will allow you to leave the room, right?
perfect definition. Yeah. So that's the old idea of escape rooms, which became popular maybe 7,
Yeah. So before
7, 8 years ago, maybe.
I moved to Japan 2018, and before moving here, it was booming in France. They were just like popping up everywhere.
Yeah.
And a group of friends, high school friends, and I, we did quite a few because we liked it. Usually more interested in like the theme or the story of a given room. But yeah, it was really, really booming. And then of course COVID hit, and it was maybe more difficult to do.
Yeah, I think early on it was just a license to print money. For I mean, you'd have anyone in any town or city could cobble together an escape room, and they knew they'd be getting people just because it was the new thing to do. Then the market got super saturated, and only those that had something interesting to say were survived, I guess.
Was it already popular in Japan as well?
Well, it's interesting because the very first escape rooms in the world were Japanese. There's a company called Scrap, who invented the entire concept of Rieru Dashutsugame back in, I think it would have been even like the late 90s, I'm going to say, or certainly the early 2000s. So they've been going 20 years at least. And it was very much for the first like 15, 16 years of their lives in Japan. It was very, very puzzle centric. A lot of them weren't even necessarily, you probably would barely class them as escape rooms today. There'd basically just be some sort of room with a load of bits of paper and locks and...
So you just solve a puzzle and leave.
Not solve a puzzle and then another puzzle and then another puzzle and another puzzle, and then eventually you either get the final code or the final door or whatever it is and you leave. But there wasn't even really a pretense of... or there was a very, very thin theme to them. So that was popular, but only among a very small, like diehard group of people. It hadn't really hit the like public consciousness.
So how was it for you when you came back from your Christmas holiday in the UK and you're like, I have an idea, I want to do this escape room. Were there any in Osaka at the time, or did you just...
There were, but they were very much of that old style. After going to this one in London, that night, my brother and I, after over a bottle or two of wine, we started brainstorming like what our room might look like, and we had probably like half of the room designed that night. Because I think it was in a way an advantage, because we hadn't done escape rooms before, we hadn't played them before. We weren't limited by what everyone else was doing or what everyone thought was sort of common sense or practical.
You were just doing your ideas your way.
So we just thought we would just really go for it. And our first room was called Dark Zen, and it was set in old Japan. The idea was about this mysterious monk, Bonta Nakamura.
Not Ponta, but Bonta.
Well, yeah, Ponta was the Ponta was the actor who ended up doing it. So we called him Bonta Nakamura, who disappeared from a locked, sealed room, and you had to try and find out where he went. And we tried to incorporate lots of like weird sort of Japanese ideas in there. There was an origami themed puzzle. You had to collect these things. You had to fold some paper with these weird markings, and when it was all folded right, suddenly this 3-digit number just appeared as if by magic. We'd have things popping open and secret doors.
So did you bring in some of your magical experience in a way, or card tricks?
In a way, yeah. I mean, there's nothing directly from magic, but if you think about a magic trick, it has these two concurrent realities. You've got the outer reality, which the audience sees, and then you've got the inner reality, which is what's really going on behind the scenes, what the magician's setting up. And with a puzzle, it's exactly the same thing. A good puzzle should have this outer reality that seems to make sense, but then obviously you've got the secret part, which the difference between that and magic is, in magic, the idea is that right to the very end, the audience still don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Whereas with a puzzle, the audience eventually find out, you know, what the inner workings are.
So what was the response of the Japanese audience to this new type of escape room with a complete theme, a story, and more interactive?
Yeah, it was something very new for them, I think. So we were pretty much overnight. There was a Japanese escape room blogger who came to our room and was just blown away by it. And he said, I think you're going to get a few more Japanese people. And almost overnight after that, we were from awesome. The first couple of months where we'd had exclusively foreigners, because that's who we were targeting. Basically overnight, it was like 80-90% Japanese.
And now you're even in residency at the St. Regis Hotel.
Yeah, so from our first room, we thought, okay, let's get a bit more ambitious with the next one. We want to make it a bit less a series of puzzles and more telling a story. So our second room was called The Dame and the Diamond, and it's like a 1940s film noir, private detective story, packed with jokes, and really, really went for it with the atmosphere and the scenery and the voice acting. And one of the St. Regis Hotel managers played either that or our third game, which is a 1960s spy thriller. And they said, can you do something at the hotel? And
wow.
So went around, had a look at the space, and we couldn't go quite as...
well, you can't destroy the room and just redecorate everything.
We had a good go at destroying it. But yeah, there's limits to what you can do. So what we decided was the original St. Regis Hotel is like a fancy 5-star hotel in New York, was built in 1909. So we set the story in the 1909 New York St. Regis.
So you had a story around that.
It's called Madame Leclerc and the Seance of Death.
That sounds very, very early
1900s. Yeah. So because we were thinking, okay, what if we're doing at that time, what sort of themes would work well? What sort of things were popular? And seances at that time were all the rage.
Yeah, I just watched yesterday the latest movie with Hercule Poirot, A Haunting in Venice, and they also have these seances. This is 1940s, but still.
Yeah. But it carried over. It carried over. And we love the era, the look of like Edwardian or furniture and just that old sort of spooky aesthetic. So yeah, it's a story about a famous fortune teller, Madame Leclerc, who's hosting a seance, and midway through the seance, one of the candles go out, and when the lights are turned on, one of the participants is dead.
It sounds like the story from the movie yesterday.
Really?
Yeah, something similar.
Haunting in Venice.
Yeah, Haunting in Venice.
I'll have to check it out.
It's pretty nice.
And yeah, so we built this. We've made basically a full murder mystery. It's nice that you're not just watching it; you're interacting with it. They're phoning up. So the idea is the players are part of the DPA, the Department of Paranormal Affairs. So it's like a paranormal branch of the police, and so the police chiefs, the DPA chief is calling them up. They have to call him up. They talk to other people. They're finding evidence. They're suspect cards. They're collecting lots of evidence, and the story, rather than having a load of story and then just a load of puzzles, the story and the puzzles are all interwoven. So in solving the puzzles, you're getting further into the story.
That sounds exciting. I need to check it out.
Please do. It's only going to be around for another month and a half.
Until the end of the year.
Yeah.
That's cool. You've done so many things here already in Japan. And do you feel like you already know what you want to create next on this journey you're on?
No. We've got a few more ideas for new interactive movies. We've got one thing that we want to do. I think the next one we're going to start working on is a submarine adventure. So
cool.
We're just getting our heads around that. But I just like diving into new stuff. My big thing the last year or two has been writing fiction. Been writing lots of short stories. and that takes up a lot of my creative energies at the moment.
And looking back at everything you've done and your interaction with a broad public here in Japan, do you feel a lot has changed in the magic scene here? Or
yeah, I think when the pandemic's definitely not helped things at all.
Yeah.
But up until then, so when I first got into magic, there wasn't that there'd be the odd magic lecture or magic magician coming from abroad, but it was very, very rare.
Mm-hmm.
And it was usually done in some sort of rented classroom where you wouldn't really see the magic at its, in its best form. What we've tried to do is invite some of our favorite magicians, Pitt, who I mentioned earlier, but lots of other magicians over, and find like good theatre spaces for them to do shows for the public and for other magicians.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of room for growth still here to kind of collaborate more internationally, to have bigger shows, to create new things.
Sure.
And also for your escape rooms to kind of get more people in it. Are all your escape rooms only kind of like pop-ups and you change the theme, or do they stay permanently?
No, the aim is to have them open as long as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Our first room, Dark Zen, had to be closed because the floor above us, their pipes burst.
Oh no.
And it was raining on us for about 10 hours, which apparently isn't very good for an escape room full of wiring and microcomputers. So that forced our hand, so we rebuilt that one from scratch. The good news is the new version of it is so much better and much more what we would want to do now. It's called Shadow Zen.
Mm-hmm.
It's a similar story to the first one, but just all
improved,
new.
Enhanced.
Then our other two rooms are the second and third rooms we built are still very much there. Each one, just because a big hotel like that can't hand out contracts for much more than a year, so that's just 1 year.
But it's already pretty cool that a hotel kind of went along with just kind of using one of their rooms as...
Yeah, it was quite bizarre. There's this feeling early on where you're there with a crowbar, like pulling bits of wall off from a 5-star hotel, and you're like, is this
really happening?
Is this all right? Am I gonna get in trouble for this? So yeah, it's been a really nice collaboration. It's a good thing, I guess, to have on the resume. It's easier now if we want to collaborate with other people, if people want us to build something, and we can say to them, look,
I think this is kind of a good statement. Yeah. If someone is kind of listening to this or watching the video and is interested in getting into magic, or especially maybe in Japan, what kind of advice would you want to give them?
I would recommend that you expose yourself to as much magic as possible early on.
Just consume it.
Consume as much as you can, because, as I said, there are so many different types of magic. You will, if you're interested in the idea of magic, you will find something that speaks to you, or something that you find that you're good at.
Yeah.
For me, for example, like pure sleight of hand isn't really my forte, and if that was the entire box of magic, I don't think I would have taken it as far as I have. But the fact that some of the ideas that I have are very different to the magic in Japan are what has allowed me to do well here. So try all different types of magic. I'd recommend books over videos.
Interesting. Okay.
I think a mix of the two is important. If you're only consuming videos, particularly YouTube, sort of sloppy YouTube exposés, you're not going to treat it with the importance, the respect that it really
it makes it look too much like a gimmick, or it's just a quick thing for fun.
A throwaway thing that you're not going to value. So, and if you are going to watch videos, please don't get pirated ones. I mean, it's completely killing the magic scene, but also you're going to value it less. In the same way as someone if you think of why these fake Louis Vuitton purses break after a few weeks, it's not just because they're made sloppily. It's just as much of it. If you've paid $3 for a bag or a purse, you're not going to value it very much. You're going to throw it around. Whereas if you've spent $400 or $500 on the thing, you're going to treat it with a lot more care. Same with even a download. If you've bought it legitimately, you're going to invest a lot more time and energy into learning the things than if you've just pirated it and it means nothing to you. So do things legitimately, please. And look around the magic world for stuff that really speaks to you, that you find that you're good at, and try and make it your own. That
sounds like pretty good advice. Thank you so much, Ben, for sharing everything about your journey into magic here. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to talk about or share? One tiny,
it's quite big, but we're not sure when it's going to be. Our big plan for the start of next year is to build Japan's first specific close-up theatre.
In Osaka. Awesome. So we'll have to come and check it out.
Please do, yeah.
I think this episode we are recording now, it's early November. It's going to come out throughout December, so we'll be on time for...
If we manage to find the space, turn it into a theatre by December, we'll be doing very well. But we're thinking early-ish next year.
Awesome. Well, we'll be looking forward to that. Thank you again, Ben, for coming, for sharing your story about magic, about moving to Japan. I know you have a deck of cards in your pockets, so we're going to record a slightly different video where you can show us maybe one of your tricks. And,
I'd be thrilled to,
yeah. But this is it for today's podcast recording. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This was Unpacking Japan. See you again next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.